Yeah, I think we can start now. Greetings, everybody from Cape Town, and welcome to the very first workshop that we are hosting as the SI Cape Town Hub. And thank you so much for your attendance. My name is Linda Kuvea. I work for Riasa Core, where I direct programs and the social enterprise. But I'm also a facilitator in this SI Cape Town Hub, and today I'll be your host. And as a quick way of introductions, maybe in the chat box, let's just drop, where you're from, where you're joining us from, so that we can all have a sense of who's in the room. Thank you. Netherlands, Brooklyn, New York, UK, Brighton, Johannesburg, South Africa. This is an international event. Namibia, Ohio, USA, Wales, awesome. Thank you everybody for joining us. And while we're still doing that, just some housekeeping pointers. Please ensure that your microphone is muted so that we do not disturb the flow of the event. And also during the event, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. And my colleague, Leonita, will collect those and will make time to interact on some of those at the end. Thank you. Mexico City, Devon, England. Copenhagen, Denmark. Okay, welcome everybody. So moving on, I will introduce the SI Cape Town team who will be working with me here today. And we have Arsene Gombe. Arsene is the CEO of Riasa Core and he's the hub representative. And today he will facilitate this event. We have Luanita Snyman van der Walt. She's working with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research as a senior environmental scientist and assessment practitioner. She's also a hub facilitator. We also have Carissa Govender, a health systems professional with a particular interest in the role of healthcare workers as agents of change. And Carissa is a support for the Hub Core team. And we also have Tanya Hickett. She's our guest. She will be speaking later on about the Iceberg Model. Yes, and now we'll also, just go through the flow of the workshop. So basically, we'll start with what the workshop is about and introducing the model. And introducing the model, that will be done by Arsene. And then we'll have a talk from Tanya on her experience working with the model. And then we'll then get an opportunity to interact on the Miro board where we'll work on the canvas before we close. Okay, thank you. And we do have some resources that we will be using for this workshop. Maybe Leonita, you can also drop the links in the chat box. Yes, those are the resources that we'll be using for this workshop, the Iceberg Canvas and the Leverage Points Guide. Thank you, Leonita, for dropping those links there. So you can access those resources, keep them, and you can also go through them even after the workshop. Thank you, Leonita. So now we're going to move to Arsene. Arsene, can you please come and introduce us to the Iceberg Model? And then after that, Tanya will talk to us about the model and give us some real life examples of projects that she has done using this model. Thanks, Arsene. Over to you.
Thanks, Linda. And thanks everyone again for joining us tonight. Very excited to have all of you join. So I'm going to introduce the Iceberg model with a video, and I will request that if we can all pay attention to watch the video, because the explanation in the video is going to give us a sense. So it's going to help us now familiarize ourselves with the canvas before we get to doing the actual activities. So I will play the video.
There are a few basic models that are very helpful for thinking about system change. One of the most popular of these is what is called the Iceberg Model. The Iceberg Model tries to illustrate the various levels of abstraction to a situation or organization, from the observable events to underlying patterns that generate these, to the supporting structure and ultimately the mental models used by an organization. The Iceberg Model helps individuals and organizations to expand their perception of a situation, to see it within the context of the whole system and not limit themselves to looking at just a single activity or event. It is designed to help people to step back and identify the different patterns that the event is part of, the possible structures that might be causing it to occur, and finally, the model that is creating those structures. An iceberg is used as an analogy to represent the underlying structures generating perceived events and issues, as it is known to have only 10% of its total mass above the water, while 90% of it is underwater. The expression tip of the iceberg is used to connote that what one can see is only a small part of the whole situation, i.e., there is much more below the surface, and what it looks like may be surprising. Just like with an iceberg, a large percentage of what is going on in our world is hidden from view. And the iceberg model tries to make this explicit by depicting it as a series of layers that sit beneath the everyday phenomena observed. The iceberg model argues that events and patterns, which are observable, are caused by systemic structures and mental models, which are often hidden. A fundamental systems thinking concept is that different people in the same structure will produce similar results. That is to say, structure causes 80 to 90% of all issues, not so much the people. Thus, to understand behaviors, we must first identify and then understand the systemic structures and underlying mental models that cause them. The iceberg model
Apologies, Austin. I think you should unmute for us to hear.
Models that support
there we go.
everything
Thanks.
else in the system through a set of beliefs, values, and assumptions shaping people's perception. The 1-minute snapshot of a current affair that we might see in the evening news is an example of an event within the iceberg model. Above the waterline are the events. Events are markers in time where multiple variables are observed. They are the what's happened or what we saw. They are discrete activities or facts about the state of things in the system, like catching a fish. If we apply the iceberg model to global issues, we could say that at the tip, above the water, are events, or things that we see or hear about happening in the world every day. That there is a new president in Italy, or that the price of commodities is up. The events that we hear about in the news represent the iceberg tip. Most of the world spends its time at the event level. It is how we perceive the world while being occupied with our daily activities. Patterns are the changes in variables that occur over time. They are the trends that we perceive taking place over time. If we look just below the waterline, we often start to see patterns or the recurrence of events. This might be, for example, recurring oil spills or one's computer periodically breaking down. Patterns are important to identify because they indicate that an event is not an isolated incident. Patterns answer the questions, what's been happening, or what's changing? When we make a statement like, it seems to be getting warmer in winter, or the price of gas is going down, these are patterns that we are observing, a series of relationships between events. When we get to the pattern level, we can anticipate, plan, and forecast. It allows us to adapt to problems so we can react more effectively to them. The structure supports, creates, and influences the patterns we see in the events. Structures can be understood as the rules of the game. They can be written or unwritten. They can be physical and visible or invisible. They are rules, norms, policies, guidelines, power structures, distribution of resources, or informal ways of work that have been tactily or explicitly institutionalized. They answer the question, what might explain these patterns? It may not be easy to see the structure, but the patterns we can see tell us that the structure must be there. Structures are composed of cause and effect relationships. These are connections between patterns. For example, a farmer might say, if I increase the number of cows, I will get more milk. She is saying there is a connection between an increasing number of cows, a pattern, and an increasing amount of milk, another pattern. Or, for example, the underlying structure of a problem, such as recurring oil spills, might be our dependence on fossil fuels. But if you look at the root cause of such spills, you can start to understand and address long-term sustainable solutions, such as developing alternative energy sources that do not rely on oil shipment. The mental model used to perceive the world is ultimately what generates the structures, patterns, and events. Below the structures are the mental models. These define the thinking that creates the structures that then manifest themselves in the patterns of events. Mental models are people's deeply held assumptions and beliefs that ultimately drive behavior. There is typically not just one pattern or structure or mental model at play. There can be many. Mental models are the attitudes, beliefs, morals, expectations, values, or culture that allow structures to continue functioning as they are. These are the beliefs that we often learn subconsciously from our society or family and are likely unaware of. Mental models are ultimately what keep the structure doing what it does. They are the thoughts and processes of reasoning that need to exist to cause the structure to be the way it is. These ideas exist in the minds of the structure's stakeholders, the people who set up the structure or those that play a role in the way it operates. Mental models are typically difficult to identify in that they engender many assumptions that are never made explicit. An example of the iceberg model may be seen in one's own health. Catching a cold would be an event. Catching colds more often when we are tired is a pattern. The systemic structures or causes for getting tired might include lack of rest from excessive work, which might in turn be a product of a mental model surrounding our identity as a hardworking person. One tends to get caught up in the immediate event of suffering from a cold and typically forgets that it is part of a pattern of events that is caused by the underlying structures of our lifestyle and perception.
Thank you. Now that we watched the video, we get a sense of what the model is theoretically. I'm going to invite Tanya to give a small presentation where she will talk about the model in a real project. Tanya, over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Arsene. I was just about to ask you to do exactly that. I'm going to put just a very few slides up, and I'm keeping everything to 10 minutes or less. And if there's chance to talk afterwards, of course, that would be lovely. Thank you. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk a little bit about how one uses this in practice, and not just how is actually what we're all going to do right after this. It's more the why and why it's useful. So starting off with just a little picture, I picked this one specifically. This is London, by the way, that we had a wonderful Becoming Anticipatory workshop that we hosted there. And I picked this picture specifically because it deals with domestic violence, which is more or less the same topic as the one that we're going to be dealing with today. And so here you can see people in action. And why, oh, there we go. It does go forward. I just need to press the right button, I guess. So why is it useful? It's a bit of a wordy slide, but I thought the slides could be available afterwards if anybody's interested. the greatest, most effective use of this iceberg model and using our imaginations to think differently about what's deep under the water at that lowest level, and how, if you change there, how powerful that change might be, is when you're working in situations or contexts where worldviews and values are really, really important. Because there a number of systems tools and futures tools and mixed futures and systems tools that are there for different reasons and different uses. And it's really important always to have informed choice. But when worldviews and values are important, this one is a must do. And the big thing is it helps us pause. Going down those levels of the iceberg helps us pause and move away from that initial knee-jerk reaction. It's the fast thinking. Those of you that aren't aware of Daniel Kahneman's work, he was the father of behavioral economics. And as a matter of fact, he was a psychologist who got the Nobel Prize for economics for the work that he did on behavioral economics and the way we think. So Daniel Kahneman calls this fast thinking system one thinking, because it's fast. It's unconscious, it's automatic, we're not self-aware, and it constitutes 98% of thinking. You know, that is that incredible work that he did, where he says that fast thinking is us concentrating on the event, sort of using just the tip of the iceberg event things to translate the world and what's happening. And then based on that, reacting or taking decisions and making choices. Iceberg helps us give a much better understanding and move away from that system one thinking to more of system two thinking. That's slower, it's conscious, it's thought through, it's self-aware, and it constitutes obviously 2% of thinking. So, but if you have a tool to help you enter that space, really, really useful. It helps us change our thinking to match the interconnected dynamic complexity of our communities and their environments. Okay, so we all know it's complex, wicked problems. A tool like this helps us engage with that more effectively. Creates a shared communication, a language with others. And that then, if you've got the shared language and you've got the same way of talking about something that is complex and challenging, it helps us create new ways of thinking and seeing. So if you can share the language and the words that it is one seeing, that helps you then create a shared understanding and shared way of sort of engaging with it. Helps us identify a wider variety of possible actions and solution pathways. So more or less saying the same thing as the knee-jerk point, just with regard to how we act or react to what it is we're seeing. And then, of course, expands the choices available to us and identify those choices where we can develop significant leverage. And that's why this iceberg model and going deep down into those layers is the one really effective way of identifying where you've got more leverage. Because those of you that are familiar with Donella Meadows' work on systems thinking, which says the most powerful thing there is if there's a paradigm shift, a shift in the way we think, that has got the most leverage to change systems. And by going down into that mental model level is where you begin working with what are possible mental model shifts, paradigm shifts. It's got good, high, strong leverage. Okay, and we use and we like iceberg model in practice. I'm talking always as a practitioner, because it really, really helps us understand that a system's behavior is a function of its structure and the mental models underpinning that structure. Now, this is a repeat of what was said in the video. And I know the video and I watched the video and I'm repeating this again. And the reason is because no matter how much work one does, explaining one does, sensitizing one does, there really is always this sort of human nature reaction to saying, well, our explanation of the world boils down to, well, why don't they change? Why don't they do something? Why doesn't the leader, the president or the club, you know, whatever, why don't they? And that's that human explanation. It's a very common explanation of phenomenon in the world. Okay, that's the one. And the other one is the external explanation, forces beyond the control. So if only the law was different, you know, if only we could have a different political system, if only, so it's that explanation that we kind of reach and grab for, despite working with systems. That is often not the most useful way of looking and working with systems. The most useful way of working with systems and looking at systems is at that level of structure, which is that understanding of relationship and interaction of the parts of the system and the mental models, those values and deeply held beliefs. So just sort of a heavy repeat of the video and saying that in practice, it's effective, it works to shift that kind of mode that we go into when we get together to start talking about issues and problems. Now, the topic that we're going to work with today is deeply problematic. And it's a deeply entrenched, wicked, complex problem, deluxe. And one of the ways one can go about working on change at that level is by using our imaginations, and different perspectives are so critical and so important. So we want different imaginations at that very bottom level of the iceberg, the mental models, is using our imaginations to come up with alternatives and then working the way back up. And I want to end with this point about the importance of imagination. And it's a quote from Ursula Le Guin, who's wonderful. She passed away recently, a wonderful science fiction author. And what she says is the exercise of imagination is dangerous to those who profit from the way things are, because it has the power to show that the way things are is not permanent, it's not universal, and it's not necessarily. And we so very much hope that the way things are with regard to gender-based violence are something that can be changed by using imagination, by undergoing some of those paradigm shifts. And I think today is a really nice practical exercise in doing so. Arsene, I think I'm actually under time, so I'm going to stop sharing and hand over back to you or to Linda.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's back to me. Thanks for that brilliant presentation. I'm happy that you actually made it more clear, and that is going to facilitate the whole process as we start working on the canvas. So just to recap again, that from what we watched on the video and Tanya's presentations, we've learned that events that we see often at the top of the iceberg, at the surface, and the patterns that comes at the bottom there are caused by systemic structures and mental model, which are often hidden. So that's what we're going to do. We know, like in South Africa, gender-based violence is a profound and widespread problem impacting almost every aspect of our life. Gender-based, which affect mostly women and girls, are entrenched in our institutions, culture, and traditions. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to unpack the topic. We're just using it as an example, to be clear on that. We will go to the iceberg model, the iceberg canvas that you see here on the screen. We will start by identifying the current events in relation to gender-based violence in South Africa. We will move on to talk about the current patterns, to identify the different patterns of gender-based violence in our society. And then we will unpack the structures that might be causing it to happen. And then finally, we'll move here to talk about the to understand the mental models that create those structures. And then from here, we will move to start looking at the future, where we will try and identify possible future models, look at the future structures, patterns, and event. But before we get there, I think it's important that I talk about the MyRobot, especially for those that are not very familiar. This is an online collaborative platform that is mostly used for ideation, strategizing. What we will be doing tonight is you grab a sticky note. I put a few, and I would prefer that we keep colors, the color coding based on the different blocks that we created, as you see here. So I would suggest you start picking up. You can either pick up from here and bring it here and start typing your ideas, or you just collect from what I put here. Yeah. So if you can just join us quickly on the MyRobot and start posting your ideas, and then we will come back to discuss a little bit. My colleague Carissa will assist to pick up the things that you'll be posting and comment on it. Thank you. Luanita, I believe you posted the link to the MyRobot already. And just if you can assist us put the timer, we will have 7 minutes for this exercise. In total, we've got 8 blocks. So we dedicate 7 minutes per block where we post ideas, we comment, and we move to the next one. And we hope to finish this in the next 56 minutes to say. Thank you. I see some people already moving to talk about the current, the patterns, but if we can just follow one by one. Let's start with the events. Let's start by identifying the different event, and we'll move as we go. So if you can just, let's do one step at the time. Let's start with the current event, and then we will move with the structure as we progress. I appreciate that those who are already thinking of posting their ideas about the current patterns, but it would be nice if we could just start with the events and go deeper down so that we can see to keep the flow. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we've come to the end of the 4 minutes. Arsene, can I ask you to zoom into that first block?
Cool. Here we are. Can you see, Kaisa?
Much better. And if you could just shift it a little to the left so I can see what our attendees have posted there. So as we have just heard, when we look at events, those are referring specifically to things that are, a lot more visible and tangible. And what we can see coming up from the attendees is, rape, date rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, dominance, murder, or murder by an intimate partner. We can also see a lack of control over decisions, a lack of consequences for perpetrators, definitely something that we see a lot in South Africa. Child marriages. And we also see things like white supremacy or patriarchy that condones violence. And I'm wondering whether that is actually something that is an event or maybe either a mental model or a structure. We find very often that women aren't believed, that those involved in sex work are also actually treated quite badly and experience violence. And we also see violence of not a physical form, but actually that of psychological violence. I'm glad that that's something that actually came up as well. I'm happy to hand over to you, Arsene. Thank you to all the attendees who have inputted.
Thank you, Kaisa. Thank you for that feedback. Nice, thanks for your contribution. So we look at the current events. Now we're going to move down to look at the patterns. And as it's been explained already, so here we're thinking of what you see that is taking place when you think of gender-based violence. What takes place in the system when you think of gender-based violence in our society? What has been happening or what is changing? Let's look at the trends and the patterns that we perceive taking place in our society. So again, if you can jump here and post your ideas.
Arsene, I see there's a really interesting question in the chat box from Charlene Rice or Reese. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Saying, are we thinking about GBV in all countries, cultures, or just South Africa? I wondered if you have opinion about that. You know, seeing we've got people from so many different cultures and countries, maybe make it a little bit broader. I don't know how people have been
that's a
thinking
good
about
question.
This.
That's a good question. Yeah, yes, the idea was we do South Africa, but I think at this stage, those who are not from South Africa, we've got something to share in relation with this. I think feel free to post your ideas as well. Otherwise, it's gonna be less participatory. We've got many people attending. Yeah.
And it's
Thanks,
perhaps useful. Yeah, and useful to note that in South Africa, it's a very, very topical issue at the moment. You know, we have our president, when he speaks about the pandemic, COVID, and addresses the nation about what it is we should be doing, he inevitably always speaks about the first pandemic, COVID, the second pandemic being GBV. So it's really top of the mind issue in South Africa.
That's very true, Tanya. We've come to the end of our next 4 minutes session where you guys were able to input. There's some very interesting comments around there being, you know, more awareness around gender-based violence. There's more advocacy that we're seeing, the media reporting on this more often. I think one of the most popular movements we are aware of is that of the Me Too movement. But at the same time, we also see that someone has noted that, you know, there might be a weakening of male dominance, but there's also a normalization of abuse as well. So I guess that depends on what your location is. You may see one more than the other, or even both within the same country. Tendai in the chat asked an interesting question on whether we're just focusing on women and children. We are aware that LGBT communities are also disproportionately affected. So please feel free to, you know, also contribute towards that as well. We also noticed that it came up twice, actually, both within the patterns and the events, that COVID and quarantine also saw a rapid increase in GBV. And we can probably say that is because people are actually indoors more. And yeah, thank you all for contributing to that. Over to you, Arsene.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Carissa. Thanks for people's contribution. Also, as you post your ideas, I know we tend to look at it mostly on a personal or individual kind of relationship, but we also dealing with society. So we are living in a society, and when you think of posting your ideas, it will also good to think of societal factors of gender-based violence. Even community, when you think of, and I guess that's what we're going to do when we move to the structure, because we've done the patterns. Now we're looking at this current structure. So we know that, like we said earlier on, the structures are the one that determine, the systemic structure determine actually what we see as events or patterns. So now that we've listed the patterns, let's now start to think of structural barriers or factors in relation to GBV. So here I would like you to think of the underlying structure that have influenced these patterns that we have here. Just what are the broad societal factors that create a climate in which violence is encouraged? So let's again do that, post our ideas. We've got 4 minutes for that. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I saw Luanita also made an interesting comment. So if you're struggling to type your ideas, feel free to put in the chat box and Luanita will collect them and post. Thank you. Yeah. I
Okay.
got some input from the chat box. Tandeka. Where is it, Tandeka? Yeah, got it. Tendai,
Since-
sorry. Yeah.
Can I ask you to scroll down and zoom into the current structures?
Brilliant.
A little bit lower, just so that we can focus on.
Oh.
Thank you, Arsene. So again, some very interesting input. What I see coming out strongly is the influence of culture, where we see that sons or the boy child often receives preferential treatment, and how that can then skew the gender balance. We also, or what we also have come across is the distribution of resources. So where we find that, you know, if men have access to more resources, and if that is skewed very strongly towards men, that can actually also put women and other vulnerable genders at risk for violence and abuse. We're also looking at some of the institutions that we you know, have our children pass through. So we're looking at the school curriculum, which would often elevate or highlight male role models more than women or girls. And then also, you know, gender-based division of labor. So women and as well as young girls generally carry the burden of having to perform more household chores, more domestic chores, as well as child rearing. Thanks. Back to you, Arsene.
Thanks, Kaesa, for that summary. Looking good. So now we're going down, another step down to talk about the current model. We started with the events. It's the event, we understand. I'll talk about the pattern. We look at the structures now. Let's go back to the mental model that creates these structures to exist. I see people already putting ideas. So let's think of the assumptions, the beliefs, values that people hold about GBV and power in the system. And what are those? What are those models expressed through the belief, attitude, expectation, morals, culture? Yeah, these are the models, as we say, are the ones that are supporting or that are creating rather the structure.
I love how deep everyone has gone into this particular topic. Definitely a lot of the comments are actually making me think very deeply around gender-based violence, especially around what our perceptions are of what men and women should be like, and the traditional roles that we think that they should take up. So someone has said or spoken about what does it mean to be a traditional man or a traditional woman? And I'm assuming that links very much to heteronormativity and how we assume that men should be physically very powerful and masculine. Women should be very passive and submissive and very feminine. So some very interesting comments coming through. Also around the objectification of women and how this actually dehumanizes women and children and makes it a lot easier to then sort of abuse women and children. And something that I thought was very interesting was around toxic masculinity, but how men actually fear being perceived as less powerful than a woman, and how that can then feed into a very unhealthy cycle of abuse. So thank you so much, everyone. Back to you, Arsene.
Thank you so much, Kaisa, for that summary. Thank you so much. So it looks good. I mean, as you can see, we started up here from the current event, unpacking, going steps down. We understand the patterns, when to identify the structures, that all the patterns. We talk about the mental models that create the structure to exist. So now we've listed this, and we need to start moving on now to the future that we want to create. So you will join me here as we start thinking of the future. So here, what we want to do is now, after knowing we start with the model, of course, as we were going one step up. So now that we understand the model, we listed them, cultural barriers, beliefs, and all that. So if we have to change, if we have to move into a new, I start imagining the imaging system, if I can put it like that. What could be the mental models and values that might be needed to shift the paradigm? So again, please join me. We put the sticky notes here for you. That you can use. Thank you.
Arsene, and what I often find useful in practice at this step is if one looks at the existing models, current models that you have, just some of the stickies, pick one sticky, even maybe a sticky that you put down, and turn it on its head, change it into its opposite. That's sometimes quite effective for starting at this level with the alternative.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tanya. Thanks. Yeah, just to confirm that we're working from what we already posted and start to see it start to think about it as new mental models or new values that we would like to see in the system, like Tanya said. And again, if we go back to the ecological or socio-ecological model, let's think of the factors, looking at the individual, relationship factors, or community factors, or even broad to talk about the societal factors. Some of them we posted already, so it's just I saw a comment in the chat. Budewin says that this is found this to be linear to a very complex reality, where you have to think of the future. I think this goes to what we, it's you will think about it if you have to shift things in the system. I guess we need to start working from understanding what exists already and build from what you understand to start imagining new models. I guess that's what the exercise is about. It's taking or imagining possible actions or possible future or possible ideas that can actually help us transition from an old system to an emerging system. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, some very interesting inputs again, coming from all of you, looking at, what would be this, for example, aspirational or future model that we're trying to build as a collective. Some looking specifically at men and their perceptions of women, others looking at the institutions that we have to go through, for example, schooling, and how women and girls should have rights around their education. Also looking at parenting and how children could potentially be raised in a gender neutral way or without the burden of, very strong heteronormative sort of ideals. Yes, that's all from me. Thanks, Arsene.
Thanks, Kaisa. Cool. Thanks everyone for your ideas. Let's go another step further to start to think of what could be the new structure that will emerge from those new mental models that we just listed here and values. Let's think of the new structures that can emerge from here, from the new models. And I suggest we keep the color coding to make it consistent. Thank you. And please remember to post any comments or questions in the chat if you are unable to. Yeah, we hope to discuss this if we have more time at the end of this session, if time allows. If we don't, we can always try and address that to our, we can always interact to our network, to our community website. Okay.
I see that there's a lot of robust discussion going down in the chats around complexity and, you know, GBV being a very complex issue and you know, how we go about using this tool. I think, you know, from my own perspective, I personally like the Iceberg model because it helps sort of reduce the complexity around issues while still acknowledging the complexity of it, if that actually makes any sense. I'm seeing some very interesting comments, and I would like to call on some of the attendees to actually unmute themselves. There's one around an alternative legal framework, which I'm very curious to hear more about. And then Arsene, if you can just scroll up a little bit more, there's someone who's also mentioned marketing and how, you know, how different marketing schemes can be used to uplift equality of men and women. So I'm calling on those two individuals if they can unmute and just share a little bit more about how they see this alternative legal framework, as well as different marketing schemes that can help, you know, gender inequality.
So I'm the person who posted about the marketing. This is Charlene Reese. Can you hear me over the music?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And when we think about marketing, when I think about marketing and all of the ways that so many things like selling alcohol or selling cars or selling cigarettes, and it's about strong men and that objectification of women. And I mean, some of them are really horrible, right? Where women are in chains or are locked up or something, and it's supposed to be, I don't know, selling whiskey. And so really changing that so that we're selling based on women and men and everyone, all gender identities being equal instead of men having power over women.
Great, well heard, Charlene. Can the person
can reduce the audio, the sound a bit, because it's especially when people are talking. Yeah, thank you so much, Joss. Especially when people are commenting, it's better for us to hear them properly. Yes, Kaisa, you.
Thanks, Charlene, for that. That's definitely something we perhaps have seen quite often in India. I know from a South African perspective that has reduced a lot more because people are a bit more, you know, aware of it and tend to call it out more often, but well received. Can we have the person who spoke about the alternative legal framework to input?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sheldon, and I posted about the alternative legal framework. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sure.
All right, so my thinking was just around with gender-based violence being a sort of high volume event for law enforcement, there might be some alternative ways to help the legal system to actually do a thorough job. So this may look like contracting lawyers and staffing investigative support and legal research, document review, litigation support, those kind of things. So yes, the normal route of the legal framework would happen, but then some adjacent, I don't know, process to help streamline this legal process as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to call on one last person. Someone has mentioned the care economy. This is a very recent concept for me, but can I call on that particular person to unmute, share a little bit about the care economy for those of us who are not fully clued up on it?
Okay, that was me again, Charlene.
No, go ahead, Charlene.
I'm hitting on all the things that you're interested in today. So the care economy, the way that I understand the care economy is that all of the labor that is done almost exclusively by women and is unpaid. And so it's childcare, it's elder care, it's housework, it's all of the, it's the economy, it's either unpaid or underpaid. So it could be people so I'm in the US, and in the US, people who work in elder care homes and work in childcare facilities are at the lowest end of the pay spectrum, but they're doing some of the most important work in our society, and teachers are in there too. And so we really undervalue the care economy because it's, I mean, I think in some ways it's because we're not, those people are not producing something. They don't have an output that it can have a dollar value on it. And so it's undervalued.
Okay, thank you for that, Charlene. I think from a health systems perspective, we also see that those who are more in the caring or nurturing professions like nurses, community health workers and therapists are also more likely to be paid worse off than other health professionals in male-dominated health professions. Thanks so much to everyone who's inputted here, as well as verbalized some of their thoughts with us. Arsene, over to you.
Oh, thanks everyone. Perfect, it's shaping up well. So now we're moving up one step to talk about the new patterns that may emerge from the new structure that we just identify here, and the new mental model. So we do that as we've been doing. And just maybe this is the time to put that music again. Thanks.
Arsene, I'm going to ask you to zoom into the patterns box. Okay,
Can you see that?
Yes, I can. I may just ask you to shift to the left or right, but I'll let you know when.
Okay.
What we're seeing with the new patterns that we would like to see emerge is how that actually contributes to a changed culture as well. So if we're looking at, for example, you know, looking at real workplace equity, looking at how, for example, men are actually engaging more in, you know, childcare, homework, what we would typically see with or activities being performed by women. Could you scroll slightly to the left, Arsene?
Yeah.
Great. Also, yeah, just a change in culture, which is more of a caring culture, where people are treated with respect and care, irrespective of their gender. A very interesting comment at the bottom of the screen, looking specifically at the potential reduction in male depression and mental health. Very often when we talk about gender-based violence, it's usually where we look at the effects on women and children and, you know, other disproportionately affected genders. But I do want the person who commented on male depression and mental health to unmute and share a little bit more about why they posted that comment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Hi, sorry, my computer was just frozen for a second. I think that if we're creating a society where there's a reduced expectation for men to be aggressive and emotionless, it also allows them to be more accepting of their more sensitive side and to accepting of their full range of emotions. And it will be more allowed for them to express that, which also puts less pressure on men to put up a facade and not actually discuss those things.
Okay, great, thank you. We're also looking at, you know, also how with culture changes, we see that women and other disproportionately affected genders gaining more recognition. So whether it be street names or us having a greater appreciation for the historical impact of women. Finance is coming up quite a few times where we would like women to have to be less dependent financially, because we definitely are aware of, you know, the relationship between women and finances and how that can lead to gender-based violence. More women participating in STEM fields, occupying higher positions, more leadership positions in businesses. Also things that, you know, that we possibly take for granted. So looking at the media and the role of films and movies, where women are not being placed in a position where they have to be rescued by the man. More female priests in the Catholic Church. And yes, definitely more increased conversations of not one size fits all solutions for such a complex issue. Yeah, over to you, Arsene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaisa. And thanks everyone for your input. So now we're going to look at the future event. What could be the new event that we hope that could emerge from the new underlining patterns, structures that we have outlined at the bottom here. So if we could just post again your ideas. Thank you.
Okay, while we have the last few attendees inputting onto the future events block, Arsene, can I ask you to zoom in, but starting from the left-hand side?
Perfect. Can you see that?
Yes. Thank you, Arsene. So we're definitely seeing, a recurring theme around women as well as men, just experiencing health and well-being, and just living in a happier and healthier society. Less fear and violence, or less fear and violent societies. We can see, kids actually having optimism around their future, and also having support of both genders at home and at school. More sustainability policies being designed and enforced by women. I am quite curious about that. So whoever has commented there on that one, please feel free to unmute and share with us what you mean by that. I'm sure the rest of us are also curious about it. Okay, I'm going to continue until that person unmutes. Women being able to unlock their potential and creativity. The one I'm curious about, Charlene, is more sustainability policies being designed and enforced by women. So men celebrating their vulnerabilities. I like the fact that it has also come back to men as well, not just as perpetrators of violence, but also the need for men to be able to tap into their vulnerability. Again, a state of peace in the world in absence of war. Women taking on the roles of decision makers, so that of CEOs, lawmakers, presidents of countries, feeling safe enough to be able to travel alone. And also, yes, I'm seeing something like humanism coming out as well. And Arsene, if you can zoom in a bit more. Another interesting comment about the Partnership Society, which is basically a piece of work which looks at where no gender basically dominates the other. So again, feel free to unmute and share your comments with us and give us a bit more context to where these comments come from. We'd love to hear more from you. Okay, thank you all. Back to you, Arsene.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. It looks very good. As you can see, we just come to the end of our brainstorming, working on the canvas, the Iceberg canvas. For those who join us late, we were unpacking gender-based violence in the context of South Africa, where we started by looking at the events and went down to understand the different patterns and the structures that create this. And we look at the mental models that also creates the structure to exist. And then we started working the other way around to start imagining future models. So we look at models, we look at the structures, patterns, and now we've got a very beautiful board. So we just have to go through this again. So very interesting comment in the chat as well that we probably didn't get the chance to engage, but I hope in future or even through our community site, we can always get to comment and engage more on some of the things that we are unable to cover. I know the attendance was good, people contributed a lot, and I believe that you all enjoy this exercise. This was an exciting exercise to me. I'm sure we've all learned new things today. And this is just the very first workshop. It was quite interesting to unpack gender-based violence in the context of South Africa, and hopefully in future we will be able to maybe expand on this or look at other topics that we can always cover using the different canvas that we have. Thank you so much for your contribution. I'm handing over to Linda, the host, to tell us the next step. Thank you. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Arsene. And thank you, everybody, and for your participation. This exercise was really great, and we could see how complex this issue of gender-based violence is. And I would like to quote Tanya who says, any system that has humans in it is complex. And we can see even from the comments that were coming in the chat box that this is a really complex issue. We need to have more time to unpack everything. And there are so many issues related to history, to economy, to society, education, and a lot, and all the interconnectedness of all of these issues. And Isabel, you just asked in the chat if there's any action. So basically, we're just using gender-based violence as an example, but the purpose of the workshop was to see how we can use the Iceberg model. And as we have shared the Iceberg model, the link to that, maybe Luanita, you can also drop it for those who didn't have access to it. So that people can access it and use it for to explore other topics. Yes. So thank you all. Thank you very much. In the coming week, we'll be able to clean up this whole canvas because, as you can see, it's not as neat, but we'll do that. And after that, we'll be able to share it with you all. And I'm sure those who are also working in the field of gender-based violence can have a look at this and see how it can be useful in their work. So thank you very much for your presence. And we have our community website. The links are right here. Leonita, you can also drop them. You can join our Cape Town Hub community, and we are also on LinkedIn, and you can also join us on our systems innovation platform. The links have been dropped in the chat. So until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.